I'm going to swap stems on an older bike I have today, which takes a Quill style stem as opposed to a threadless style stem. Biggest difference being obviously this guy here, and this, you'll find Quill stems on older style bikes. You pretty much will not see them on any modern bikes, but this guy goes down into the fork, and there's a screw at the top here that you tighten, and as you do, this little wedge-shaped piece slides up and tightens on the inside of the fork, and that's what holds it in place. As opposed to the threadless style, which you will mostly see these days, which actually clamps around the tube of the fork itself and helps hold the fork to the bike. So it's pretty simple and straightforward to swap out, and I'll show you why I'm swapping out in just a second. The reason I'm swapping out stems is because of this stem right here. Back when I rode this as a kid, this was kind of a novel concept before, you know, the suspension bikes took off and everything else. And this was a bit of a novelty. It was a suspension stem. And as you can see, if you push down the handlebars, there's a little shock absorber, which I'm pretty sure is just an elastomer buffer with a spring, absorbed some of the shock. And I mean, for the most part, it kind of worked, but it definitely was gimmicky. And there is one danger to it. As it wears out, and as I got older and got bigger, this becomes more of a danger, because if you hit a bump with it, it has a tendency to kind of pop you back up, and if you aren't ready for it, it can kind of put you over the handlebars. So I would not, in good conscience, let somebody else ride this with that stem on it. So I'm going to swap it out with a solid Quill stem, and that way when one of my friends borrows the bike today, it'll be a little bit safer for them. So where we have to start with removing this style stem, unless you're fortunate enough to have a two-piece stem, is it's got this clamp. Let's see, I'll get this in here. It's got this clamp section here that actually clamps around the bar. In this case, it's 5mm. Most of the time it will be 5mm, but you'll want to check that before you start reefing on it with any kind of Allen wrench. But in order to get the stem out and to get the bars off, you have to loosen that, and you have to actually remove one of the brake levers, one of the derailleurs, your grip, and any other accessories you have on one side, because we'll loosen it and we'll slide the bar out the other side. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. And in this case, it's both 4mm and 5mm that are used, so we'll just loosen this up. You don't have to take the bolts out or anything like that, just loosen it up. And okay, so in my case, I do have a little bar end cap here, which hopefully you always have on your bike. It helps to keep dirt and debris out, and also, if you were to happen to fall off your bike, it keeps, especially if you don't have something like this bar end, it keeps the bar from impaling you and causing some serious damage, makes it less likely. Most of the time they just pop out like that. Some of them have an Allen key, but you'll have to pay attention to your bike. And so then we just start taking components off. So bar end should just slide right off. Also, these bar ends are kind of a safety concern. I'm going to leave them on there, but I would never use them again if I were going to put another bike together. And I like RJ the Bike Guy's little trick of using the isopropyl alcohol to take off the grip, as opposed to what we always used to use, which was soap and water, which had the unfortunate side effect of when it got some rain on it, it would loosen up. So easiest thing to do, just jab something underneath the grip like this screwdriver, pour a little isopropyl alcohol in there, and we can start to work loose as it works its way up through capillary action. Might have to get some from this side too. But the other nice thing about using the isopropyl alcohol or denatured alcohol, rubbing alcohol, whatever, actually don't use denatured alcohol, but isopropyl or rubbing alcohol will be fine. But the nice thing about it is that it evaporates cleanly and doesn't leave any sort of residue. So the grip will come right off without causing any issues, and it's pretty safe to use. So you don't have to worry about getting it on anything or like that. And so we'll just slide our brake lever, let it hang off to the side, slide our derailleur off. And the nice thing about this too, if you remove it just from one side, is that you can reference the other side as to what the angles were and like that, so you're not starting completely from scratch. So now we just loosen the clamp here. Also, I'll mention that I have my bike here in just my trainer stand to help steady it. If you had like a, you know, I could put it in my bike work stand, but that's a little overkill. You know, if you had somebody holding it, it just makes it a lot easier. Maybe you can come up with something a little more creative to hold it in place, but just do that, loosen it. Is that enough to, okay, and should just slide right out, but not enough room on the cable, so we'll take the stem off, and that'll make this easier too. And in the case of this, just have a little cap that covers it, and it should be 5mm again on this. Do I have to use extension? No. And so this is where it could get a little tricky. Oftentimes that little wedge or the tube itself that goes down into the fork will be rusted or corroded into place. I didn't install this one, the bike shop did, so I'm curious to see if they put any grease on it or anything, or if this is going to be the tough part of this whole job. So we can break it loose, which it does. Don't force it or anything, but apply steady, even pressure. Oh, good, it came right loose. So we should be able to slide that right out. Ah, perfect. And it looks like they actually had to use a shim when they installed it. So as you can see, it's got this shim. And that's the other thing is your steerer tube, fork tube, whatever you want to call it. They are different sizes. I think 29.5 is pretty standard. I don't know what size this is, but the Quill stem that I have is the original one for the bike, so I know for sure that will fit. But you'll want to pay attention to that. If you do go to swap this out, make sure you get the right stem size, or you can get an adapter, shims or whatnot to make that work. Getting ready to install the original stem, so it's the solid stem I showed in the beginning of the video. One thing I do want to note that might be useful if you get this far and you're having trouble with getting it to release from there. Like I said, this can get all corroded, or it can just get a little bound up, and what you'll notice is that as you're backing the screw out up here, it'll just keep coming up and there won't be any movement at all or whatnot. What you can do, and I recommend like using either like a brass hammer or some sort of soft hammer, maybe a small block of wood to put over the top of this, but you can put that piece of wood there and give it a few taps with a hammer. Don't beat on it, but you can give it a few taps with a hammer, and oftentimes what that will do is drive that back down and into place, and that'll help to loosen it up. That can make that a lot easier to do. So what I'm going to do, because this is completely bone dry, there's no grease or anything on it, is I'm going to put a little bit of Never Seas all over this. I'm not going to apply it extremely liberally or anything. I'm just going to put enough on there to make sure that it never or lessens the likelihood of it rusting in place. So we'll just get a little bit of that here. And unfortunately, this brush doesn't really know how to not apply it liberally, so we'll just lightly coat what we can here. Put a little bit on there. Some people will say that it acts like a lubricant. There is grease in it. It's not wrong to say lubricant, but I would never use it in place of a grease. Like if you're greasing like some wheel bearings or something like that, I would never use it in place of that. It's definitely not meant for that, but it does help in the situation of stuff like this to keep corrosion from happening. I mean, it's called Never Seas. That's the whole point. So we're just going to back this down a little bit so we don't have to fight with the stem. Yeah, and don't back it out all the way, or else you'll lose a little wedge down in there, and you'll be fighting with that, and that'll be annoying. And I'm going to, as far as how far down you want to put it, there's usually a line on it that's the safe distance down. or maximum height that you can put it. So I'm actually gonna put it a little lower than what it was. And for now, until we get everything else back on, I'm just gonna lightly tighten it down just so it doesn't move around a lot. I'm not gonna worry about its positioning. I'll cover that in a moment, but I just wanna kind of loosely get it in place so we can move about getting the rest of it back together. And I'm gonna wipe the never sees off. The downside of never sees is you never get it cleaned off. Anything it touches is now claimed by never sees. So you can come back later with a cloth, or yeah, as you can see, I'm making quite the mess. So get the majority of it off and we'll clean that up a little better afterwards. Check my hands, make sure it's not completely covering them. But it seems to find its way wherever you don't want it. And obviously, I'm not taking my sweet time with this, but we'll get the handlebar back roughly into position, and we'll tighten that down as well. And what's nice about this is that there's still marks on the handlebar from where it was. So, you know, all of this is sort of like personal preference type things as far as the angle of your bar, your handlebars and stuff, and you're probably gonna have to tweak it fairly often. So we'll just lightly get that into place as well. And then the next thing we want to get on is our shift cable or shift lever. Slide that back on, loosen that up a little bit. Of course, it's forming. And the nice thing about this too is you can kind of see where it sat previously, so we'll roll that into position. And then next will be our brake lever. Get that roughly into position. And then we will get our grip back on. And these have writing on them, so it doesn't really matter, but you know, for aesthetic reasons, put it however you want. If you want it upside down, you go for it. If you don't, whatever. But we're going to start by just take and put a little rubbing alcohol in there again, and that should help it slide right into place. So we'll get that on there. And then we're going to space all of this based upon the bar end, since that's the furthest thing out, and it should be flush with the end of the handlebar. We can then figure out how we need to have our, where we need the grip to go and stuff. So that will help to get it back to where it was. I don't really want to tap this back on, but I might have to. My hands are covered in alcohol. It's making this a little more difficult. What do you think of the purple? It's kind of a interesting color. For some reason, I really loved the anodized purple at that time. All right, so I'm going to start by getting the bar ends here at the same angle as the other side, and that's how I'm going to base everything off of. This gives me a good reference point. Oh, didn't mean to bump the camera, but I'm going to get these roughly in the right position. Oh, that's why we're having trouble getting that on. The handlebar's a little bit bent. Just eyeball it here, get it roughly where it's supposed to be. There. And then we don't need that cap. We need this one to go back into the bar end for safety reasons. And then we can slide the grip over to where we want it. Get roughly into position. Oh, and actually, it doesn't matter which way you get this one on because it will has text going either way. So we'll slide our levers back into position. Let's see, we'll start with this guy because we can eyeball that. So, like I said, since we didn't take anything off the other side, we can, so I'm going to remove this so you guys can see a little better. I think that'll work. Since we didn't move anything on the other side, we can reference that to get a better idea as to where these all need to go. So, makes it a little easier. And so when you're snugging these down, you don't have to snug them down extremely tight. I mean, you obviously don't want this stuff moving on you, but you don't want to put your full body weight on it. you're not dealing with steel a lot of times with this. You're dealing with like you know, like a metal alloy of some sorts that has been cast and like that. So it's not very happy to be clamped right down. You know, you have a chance of really stripping one of the screws out or cracking it if you really reef on it. But, you know, like I said, obviously you don't want it to fall out. So what I like to do is I get them snug on there to where I'm happy with it, and then I'll ride the bike for a little bit, and then I'll recheck all these to make sure they're fairly tight, because they probably will loosen up over time anyways as you ride it, as you go over bumps and stuff. So it's always a good idea to check this stuff once in a while. So now everything is pretty much where we had it. We want to go ahead and check to make sure that the handlebars are centered. So we can see it's actually off to the left-hand side a bit. So we will loosen this, move it just a hair, just a hair. I think that angle would be better. Tighten that up. And then a couple ways you can adjust. Wow, I actually got that on pretty close, but it is off. So we'll adjust where the handlebars are facing by just kind of standing over the front tire, and I sight off of the bolt and, well, both of the bolts. I make a line basically, and then I sight that down against the middle of the tire, and if I can make a straight line, then I know it's lined up. So tighten that down. And this is steel. Still don't want to go like really reefing down on it, but you definitely don't want to loosen it up either. So there's that. And then we got that. Let's tighten that down. That's pretty good right there. All right, so now that's all that way. I'm going to go and give it a little bit of a shakedown ride and make sure everything's tightened up. And the grip will still be a little loose from the alcohol, but as the alcohol evaporates, the grip will stay solid on there. And like I said, I like the alcohol better, mostly for safety reasons. I've had a couple times after putting grips on a little bit of soap and water, even after it's dried, if it like rains really hard or whatever, that water will work its way into the grip and it'll become slippery again. So yeah, I'm gonna go take this for a ride. That should be it. And if have any questions, ask in the comments below. Thank you.